The chamber smelled like it always did, 17 species, 17 kinds of recycled air, and underneath all of it, the particular metallic cold of a station that had been running for 300 years and had stopped apologizing for its smell sometime around year 12. Councillor Varel of the Suri arrived exactly on time, as he always did, which meant he arrived 11 minutes before anyone else, as he always did, and he sat in his chair and watched the room fill the way a man watches water rise in a glass he has been studying his whole career. He had been doing this for 37 years. He was very good at it. The Dreth arrived first after him. 4 delegates, 2 legal advocates, 1 junior staffer who always sat 3 seats too far from the table and spent every session looking slightly panicked, and they arranged themselves with the kind of deliberate precision that announced to the room they had a plan for today and were feeling excellent about it. The Hennet delegation came next, then the Sorak, then the tall membrane-winged jaw who folded their wings so aggressively when seated that it always looked like they were trying to mail themselves somewhere smaller. And then the humans. Ambassador Junio came through the left corridor entrance with his aide Nara half a step behind him and 2 junior staff following after that, and Varel watched him cross the chamber floor with the attention of a man who had spent 37 years watching this exact same walk and still could not decode what it meant about the person doing it. Junio was 54 years old. Varel had looked this up twice, in different databases, as if the second source might offer something the first had missed, and he moved like someone who had made a private arrangement with time and found the terms completely acceptable. He sat down, both hands flat on the table, the smile already in place. Varel had spent an amount of his personal hours that he would describe to no one trying to classify that smile, not in any official capacity, he told himself, but the way a person becomes quietly obsessed with a thing that refuses to become familiar no matter how many times it appears in front of them. It was not a happy smile and it was not an unhappy one. It existed in a separate category from both, the way a door painted to look like a wall exists in a category different from either doors or walls, and the longer Varel looked at it across 37 years, the less certain he was about what was operating behind it. The session opened. The council chair ran the standard checks, attendance, quorum, pending motions, the usual procedural machinery, and the Galactic Council turned the way it had been turning for 411 years, slow, enormous, completely sure of itself. Varel half listened. He was watching Junio. He had been doing this every session for 37 years and he had built a private catalogue of observations he had never shared with anyone because they would have made him sound like a man describing a ghost. Junio never checked his personal device during sessions. Junio never whispered to Nara during another delegation's remarks. Junio had never once in 37 years raised his voice inside this chamber. Other species did all of these things regularly. Even Varel's own people, who prided themselves on discipline, occasionally broke form, a whispered word, a pointed look, the small human leakages of personality that even the most trained diplomat could not fully contain after 3 hours of procedural language. The humans never leaked. They sat through their sessions like people who had made a conscious decision to be present and were honoring that decision with the full weight of their attention. And Varel found this, if he examined it honestly, more unsettling than if they had simply been loud and easy to read. The Dreth tabled their motion halfway through the session. It was a resource extraction rights claim over the Kalos Belt, a stretch of mineral-rich space sitting adjacent to several shipping corridors, some of which the humans used for their outer colonial supply routes. The Dreth advocate who presented it was polished and fast. The language of the motion was careful in the way Dreth legal language was always careful, which was to say it was designed to sound like one thing while quietly accomplishing something else, and across the chamber Varel could feel the particular satisfaction the Dreth were radiating, the kind that comes from people who have run every calculation and like all of their answers. He watched Junio during the full presentation. Junio listened. He did not make notes, did not frown, did not exchange any kind of look with Nara beside him. He simply listened with his hands flat and his face arranged in the expression of a man who finds everything genuinely interesting and has never once in his life been caught off guard by anything. When the Dreth finished, the council chair asked for preliminary responses. Several delegations offered brief remarks. The Henat had concerns about transit lane impact. The Jaw wanted clarification on extraction volumes. And when the chair reached the human arc, Junio nodded once in the direction of the room. The UEF will review the motion in good faith, he said. His voice occupied the same temperature it always did. Not warm, not cold, somewhere in the specific middle range that a very old and very wide river might use if rivers could speak. The Drether's lead advocate typed something on his console. With the energy of a man checking a box he had already decided was checked. Varel made a note in his private log, not the official session record but the personal one. The one he kept in shorthand no junior staffer could read, and the note said only, *human said yes but did not say yes*. He had 41 similar notes from the past 37 years. None of them had ever resolved into something he could point to and name. The session continued. Trade index updates, a border arbitration between two minor systems, a lengthy procedural argument about quorum definitions that Varel had been watching cycle through the agenda for 9 years without resolution, and through all of it Junio sat with his hands flat and his smile at its usual operational height, and Varel did what he always did, which was watch and note and not quite understand. When the session closed, the delegations gathered their things and the chamber began its slow exhale. 17 species moving for 17 exits, the corridor murmur starting up, someone in the Dreth cluster laughing at something with the brightness of people who believe they have just secured a win. Varel was still collecting his documents when he noticed Junio had paused at the left corridor entrance. Not stopped, paused, the way a person pauses when something occurs to them that they decide is worth saying and decide equally is not worth. Turning around and without facing the room, without addressing anyone visible, Junio said, "The belt's lovely this time of year." Then he walked through the corridor and was gone. Nara 2 steps behind him. The junior staff after. Varel stood at his table in the emptying chamber and looked at the left entrance for a moment. He would not have been able to measure, and then he looked down at his private log and added one line below all the others. Why does that feel like a warning? He had no answer. He had not had an answer for 37 years. He closed the log and walked to his office and thought about the smile the whole long way there, and about the belt, and about the fact that in 37 years he had never once heard Ambassador Junio say anything that was only what it sounded like. Nara did not sleep on station ships. She had not slept on station ships since she was 22 years old, and a hull breach alarm on the UEF carrier Deziong had gone off at 3 in the morning and stopped being an alarm 11 seconds later when it became something else entirely. She did not think about that often, and when she did, she moved on fast, and she had gotten very good at moving on fast. So she was awake at 0300 when the traffic report came in. It was not unusual for reports to come in at 0300. The outer colonial corridors ran on their own time, 6 hours behind. Council station, and Nara had structured her whole schedule around being available when they were, and she sat at her desk with her second cup of something warm that the station cafeteria called coffee and was lying about it, and she opened the traffic queue the way she opened it every night. The first 11 items were routine. The 12th was not. She read it once. The words arranged themselves into a shape she recognized but did not immediately allow herself to name. And then she read it again, more slowly, the way you reread something when you want very badly for it to say something different than what it says. Colony Station Hewon, 3 days travel from Council Station, Adreth. Survey Fleet, 11 vessels, had transited the Kalos Belt shipping corridor without filing rights, without responding to civilian hails, without altering their vector by a single degree when the civilian convoy running the corridor began emergency scatterburns to get clear of them. 34 civilian vessels. Agricultural workers, supply runners, a colony resettlement transport, a school ship carrying 260 children between the ages of 7 and 14 on a supervised relay to the Hune outer settlement. The Dreth fleet did not stop. The school ship's secondary hull section lost integrity during an emergency burn. The internal bulkhead alarm gave the kids in that section 9 seconds. 9 seconds is not very long when you are 7 years old and someone is screaming at you to run and you do not fully understand what running toward means when there is no toward available. 11 children. Nara set the report down on her desk with both hands flat the way she had learned from watching Junio for 5 years, and she sat very still and counted to a number that was not a real number. It was just the number of seconds it took for her hands to stop wanting to do something she had not decided to do yet. She picked up the ambassador's private channel. "Hewon corridor," she said when he answered. He always answered. She had never once reached his message. Service. She did not think he slept either. Dreth Transit, 11. There was a pause on the other end that was not the pause of a man being surprised. It was the pause of a man confirming a thing he had already felt coming. "Send me the full report," Junio said. "Already sent." Another pause, shorter this time. "Get some rest, Nara." She almost laughed at that. She would have laughed if anything about the moment had contained space for it. But instead she said "Yes, sir," and closed the channel and sat at her desk and did not get any rest. The Dreth had done this to 4 other species this cycle. She had read about all 4 cases in the background briefings she compiled for Junio before. Every session, the Dreth survey fleet tactic was documented, analyzed, classified as a calculated pressure application in the UEF Strategic Assessment Database, and marked with a notation that no target species to date had responded with anything other than accelerated negotiation in the Dretha's favor. That was the model. That was what the Dretha simulation said would happen. You put 11 large ships in front of a civilian convoy, you make them scatter, you let the chaos speak the language of implied threat, and then you wait for the other side to come back to the table carrying the weight of that chaos in both hands and looking for a way to set it down. The model assumed the other side would want to set it down. Nara opened a second channel, not Junio's, a different one, with a green header that she had used 4 times in her career and hoped each time would be the last time, and she typed 4 words into it and waited. The confirmation came back in 40 seconds. She stared at it for a moment. Then she closed the channel and stood and walked to her viewport and looked out at Colony Station HFY, visible from here as a small cluster of lights against the belt's edge, bright and organized and completely unaware of what was already moving toward it in the form of something that had been decided in a room very far away. HFY had 214,000 people on it. Agricultural. Hub, 3 outer systems depending on its output, 18 years of human construction and habitation, and the particular way a place becomes a place when enough people build their specific ordinary lives inside it. Grocery run routes and school schedules, and which family keeps the dog that gets into everyone's yard, and whose grandmother makes the best preserved plum, and the 11 children who had been running for a bulkhead that was 9 seconds too far away. Nara thought about a word her grandfather had used when she was small. Hum. He had never fully explained it to her. He said it was not the kind of word that explained easily. It was the kind of word you carried until you understood it from the inside, and she had been carrying it for 23 years, and she thought maybe she understood it now, standing at a viewport at 0300 looking at a cluster of lights that contained 214,000 people who were going to wake up tomorrow and go through their ordinary days not knowing that 11 seats at a school were empty, and that somewhere, in a room with a green header channel, the number 11 had already become a different kind of word entirely. She closed the viewport shade. She went back to her desk. She opened the traffic queue and worked until morning with the same flat, deliberate attention she applied to everything, and she did not cry, and she did not think about what the green header confirmation meant in practical terms, and she did not think about the children. She thought about the Dreth models. She thought about all the assumptions baked into those models, the assumption that humans would treat 11 deaths the way accountants treat a loss, something to record and absorb and carry forward as a reason to negotiate faster. And she thought about how a model is only as good as the thing it's modeling. She had spent 5 years watching Junio. She knew exactly how good those models were. Outside, in the dark of the corridor, the station hummed around her, 214,000 lights doing their ordinary thing, and Nara sat at a desk with her cold coffee in her flat hands and the particular kind of stillness that is not peace but has learned over a long time to wear peace's face. The green header channel did not flash again that night. It did not need to. It was already running. Varel arrived early to the emergency session. He had not arrived early to a council session in 19 years. There had been a moment in his 38th year of service when he had decided that arriving early was the kind of thing young councillors did when they were still impressed by the room, and he had stopped doing it then and replaced it with exactly on time, which suited his dignity better. He arrived 22 minutes early to this one and sat in his chair in the empty chamber and did not examine why. The Dreth arrived next. They came in with the same cluster formation as always, the same careful arrangement, the same junior staffer sitting 3 seats too far from the table. But today there were 3 additional legal advocates he had not seen before, carrying document cases with the heavy deliberate weight of people who had been up all night preparing arguments they were confident in. They spread their materials across their arc with the particular efficiency of people who believe the day belongs to them. Varel watched them and said nothing and felt something he was not going to call dread because he was 58 years old and had served this council for more than half his life, and dread was not something he entertained in official settings. The other delegations filtered in. The Henat and the Sorak had sent senior representatives instead of their usual junior staffers, which meant the incident report had travelled faster than normal through diplomatic channels, which meant everyone was treating it as something worth watching rather than something to wait and see about. The chamber filled. The humans came in last. Junio came through the left entrance the way he always did, Nara beside him, 2 junior staff behind, and Varel tracked the walk across the chamber floor with the full attention he had been giving it for 37 years. And this time something was different, and it took him 8 full seconds to identify what it was. Junio was not smiling. He sat down, both hands flat on the table. The expression on his face was the one that was left over when the smile was absent. Varel had not studied this expression because he had not, until this moment, needed to, and it was not angry, it was not grief-stricken, it was not anything so readable as those things. It was something closer to what a very old, very precise tool looks like when someone takes it down from where it has been hanging on the wall and begins to clean it. Nara sat beside him. Under the table, her left hand was doing something, a slow and rhythmic motion that Varel could not fully see from his angle, but that suggested she was counting, or clenching, or stopping herself from reaching for something she had decided not to reach for yet. The session opened. The council chair acknowledged the emergency motion, the He-1 corridor incident, the Dreth survey fleet transit, the civilian convoy impact, and gave the floor to the Dreth legal team to present their preliminary position. The lead advocate was excellent. Varel had to admit this while watching the presentation. The argument was clean and fast and airtight in the way that the best legal work is airtight, which is to say every soft place had been reinforced before anyone else could find it. The corridor in question had a registration gap for civilian convoy traffic that went back 11 years, a bureaucratic failure no one had flagged, and under council transit law a fleet operating in an unregistered corridor bore reduced liability for civilian vessel behavior during transit. 11 children. The words were not in the room, the advocate did not say them, the motion language did not use them, the legal argument processed them as civilian casualties during an unscheduled encounter, and Varel watched them not be in the room and watched Junio watch the advocate speak, and the room was full of something that had no name in the Suri language. Other councillors gave remarks. The Henat had process concerns. The Sorak wanted a formal incident classification. The Jur representative offered a lengthy statement that used the word regrettable 4 times. Junio said nothing. 493 minutes of session. Junio said nothing. He listened. His hands stayed flat. He did not look at Nara, and Nara did not look at him, and Varel had been watching humans long enough to understand that when 2 people in the same room are not looking at each other with that much discipline, they have already said everything that needed saying. Varel noticed, around the 40-minute mark, that his secondary nerve cluster was doing something unpleasant, a response his body produced in high-threat environments, not in council chambers, not in rooms full of procedure and legal language and the slow institutional machinery of a body that had been resolving disputes for 400 years. He told it to stop. It did not stop. The council chair, completing the formal round of remarks, turned to the human arc and asked Ambassador Junio to state the UEF's preliminary position on the incident so the session could log the dispute and establish a negotiation timeline. Junio looked up. He found Councillor Murrick of the Dreth, the senior delegate, the one with the careful face and the satisfaction behind it that he was only partially hiding, and he held Murrick's eyes for a count of 3. "We don't have a dispute," Junio said. The chamber processed this in the way a large, slow machine processes unexpected input, a beat of delay while the words travelled through 17 different species' understanding of what dispute means and what not having one signifies in the context of a formal incident session. Several councillors exhaled with visible relief. The Dretha's lead advocate began typing. The framework for a no-dispute settlement was a known document. The council had standard templates, 47 of them, covering various grades of acknowledged incident without formal contest, and the advocate was clearly already selecting the applicable version and filling in the relevant fields. Varel was not exhaling. He was sitting very still with his hands on his own documents and doing the thing he had been doing for 37 years, which was studying the human delegation, and what he was seeing was this. Junio had not relaxed after he spoke, Nara's left hand under the table had not stilled, and the 2 junior staff at the back of the human arc were looking at the middle distance with the focused, careful blankness of people who have been told to look like nothing is happening and are working very hard at it. Asterisk, "We don't have a dispute" asterisk could mean we are conceding. It could also mean we have decided this is not the right room. Varel had spent 37 years watching humans choose this room over and over, in sessions where they had clearly been pressed, in votes that had clearly cost them something, in procedural debates that had clearly been designed to wear them down. They had always chosen this room, had always kept their voice at the same temperature and their hands flat and their smile at operational height. What did it mean when a species that always chose the room said the room was no longer relevant? Junio's personal device lit up on the table in front of him. He glanced at it, 1 second, no more, read something, and placed it face down. Then he looked at Councillor Murrick again, and Murrick was not looking back. Because Murrick was watching his advocate type and feeling like a man who has already won the day, and Varel watched Junio watch Murrick with a patient, level attention of someone watching a clock count down to a number they have already decided on. Varel leaned toward his aide. "Pull our non-essential staff from this building," he said, low, without moving his head, barely any air behind the words at all. His aide looked at him. "Pull them," Varel said. "Now, quietly, and do not explain why." His aide left. Varel turned back to the chamber. The Dreth advocate was still typing. Junio watched him type. The smile was still absent. Outside the chamber, very far away in a corridor of space that the Council's charts listed as inactive, something Varel had no way of seeing was already in position and had been for 62 hours, and it was patient the way that large, deliberate, completely certain things are patient, which is to say it was not patient at all, it had simply already finished waiting. Taiho had not slept. This was not unusual. He had a long career behind him that had contained many stretches of not sleeping, and he had learned somewhere around his 41st year that the body was more cooperative about this than people gave it credit for, if you gave it coffee and a clear enough problem to focus on. The problem was clear. The green header orders had come in 62 hours ago, 4 words, from a channel with a security clearance level that most of his own staff did not know existed, and for 62 hours he had been working backward from a specific number, filling in all the steps between now and that number in the way that you pack a bag when you already know exactly where you are going. His aide stepped into the command room and asked if he wanted to address the council session directly. The feed was live. The channel was available. Taiho said no. He thought about it for 4 seconds. "Actually," he said, "open the channel." The council session convened at 0900 Standard. Varel had barely slept. This was unusual, and he sat in his chair with a cup of something warm and watched the chamber fill with the particular attention of a man who had stopped trusting his own instincts the night before and was trying to decide if he should start trusting them again. The Dreth arrived in full formation, this time all 7 members of their delegation, plus the 3 additional advocates from the day before, plus 2 individuals Varel did not recognize who carried themselves with the specific contained quality of people whose job is to stand near important things and look like they're not there. They expected to sign a preliminary framework today. Varel could see this in the way they arranged themselves, the orderly spread of documents. The quiet satisfaction moving between them in the small signals that species leak when they have decided a thing is already finished. The humans arrived. Junio and Nara, the same entrance, the same formation, and Varel tracked the walk the way he always tracked it and noted that the junior staff today were different, not the ones from yesterday, different faces, different posture, and if Varel was being precise about it, the posture of people who had done very specific other things before they became junior diplomatic staff. Junio sat down. Hands flat. No Ismail. The session opened, standard procedural checks, and then the council chair gave the floor to the Dreth advocate for the settlement framework presentation. The advocate stood and delivered it cleanly. 3 pages, 7 clauses, a compensation framework for the He-1 convoy impact expressed in units that were technically generous by council standards and practically designed to close the matter in the Dreth Combine's favor within the next 30 days. He finished. The chair asked for responses. 3 delegations offered brief supportive remarks. The framework was reasonable. The process had been followed. The council's function was to resolve incidents like this, and this one appeared to be on its way to resolution. And then the chair reached the human arc. Junho sorted. This was already unusual. Junior. Staff presented preliminary framework responses, not ambassadors, not standing. And the chamber registered this the way a room registers a temperature change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small adjustments of attention that happen when something is not quite right. Junio did not look at the document on the table in front of him. He looked at the room. The UEF does not recognize the Dreth Combine's legal defense, he said. Clean sentence. No temperature change in his voice. The UEF does not intend to contest it in committee. The Dreth advocate's hands stopped moving over his documents. Effective immediately, the UEF is withdrawing from all council-mediated negotiation. With the Dreth Combine, the chamber produced a sound, not a loud sound, not a dramatic one, but the particular collective intake of 17 species all doing the same thing at the same time, which was recalibrating, because withdrawal from talks was unusual, but it was not unprecedented. It was in the charter, it was a known mechanism, it was still within the machinery of the room. Then Junio did something no human ambassador had done in 37 years of council membership. He picked up a document. He began to read from it. It was not a legal brief. Varel recognized this within the first sentence, felt it before he recognized it the way you feel whether before you see it. It was a military operational summary, and it was not historical, and it was not projected. It was current. It was happening right now. As of 62 hours ago, Junio said, UEF Strategic Command initiated a comprehensive economic interdiction of the Dreth Combine's 4 primary export corridors, corridors registered under Council Charter Sections 12, 17, and 41, all operating within legal parameters. He turned a page. UEF vessels have established monitoring positions adjacent to Dreth refinery infrastructure in the Outer Kalos, the Marate system, and the Suan Belt, all positions within acknowledged UEF patrol jurisdiction under the Mutual Defense Accords the Dreth themselves co-signed in the 3rd session of this council cycle 11 years ago. The Dreth lead advocate was not typing. He was holding the settlement framework document with both hands. "This is not a declaration of war," Junio said, and his voice was the same temperature it had been for 37 years, the same river-wide, river-deep evenness that Varel had spent decades cataloguing and had never fully explained. "The UEF does not go to war over accidents." A pause, the length of exactly one breath. "The Dreth Combine has 71 hours to make the families of He1 whole, full and complete restitution. No council mediation, direct and documented, after 71 hours the interdiction becomes the permanent condition of UEF Dreth relations until further notice." He sat down, hands flat. In the command room, Taiho watched the session fade. Behind him, through the viewport that ran the full length of the command deck, 3 UEF carrier groups were executing a fold maneuver in precise silent sequence, enormous ships moving with the unhurried weight of things that have already decided where they are going and are simply going there now. No urgency, no drama, the way you move furniture when you are clearing space for something. "First wave is in position," his aide said. "Hold," Taiho said. "Give them the 71 hours. He said it the way you say a number out loud when you have already finished all the math that goes around it. The council chamber had become a different room. Varel was aware of this the way you become aware of a change in air pressure, not through one sense but through all of them at once, because the room that had existed before Junio stood up was the council chamber, which was a place governed by charter and process and the accumulated procedural weight of 400 years, and the room that existed now was something else. It was a room where an ambassador had just reported, in a level voice and with a document in his hand, that his government had already been moving for 62 hours inside the legal structures of the very body he was addressing, and had done so with enough precision that the Drether's extensive modeling apparatus had not flagged any of it as a risk vector. Because the humans had never used those vectors before. Because in 37 years they had not needed to. Because they had always chosen the room. Varel sat very still. He watched the Drether's senior delegate, Councillor Marek, sitting in his chair with his hands no longer arranged in the usual careful deliberate placement. They were just sitting on the table now, the way hands sit when the person they belong to has stopped thinking about them because all available thought is going somewhere else entirely. The chamber was doing several things at once. 2 delegations were attempting to table emergency procedural motions. One was requesting a legal interpretation from a chair on whether what had just been described constituted a council charter violation. It did not. Varel had already done that calculation. The humans had been extraordinarily careful about this. And somewhere in the back of the chamber someone was speaking at high volume in their own language, and no one was asking them to stop. Varel was not doing any of these things. He was doing the math he should have done 37 years ago, and it was simple math, and the answer was not complicated, and what it said was this: the humans had been capable of exactly this since before he had first watched Junior walk across this chamber floor, and they had walked across it anyway, every session, for 37 years, and smiled and kept their voice at river temperature and absorbed things that must have cost them something and kept choosing the room over and over and over. A choice, not a nature. A daily deliberate choice, made fresh every time, by people who understood what the alternative looked like and had decided the room was worth more. He looked at Nara. She was watching the chaos in the chamber the way someone watches whether they made a decision about before they left the house this morning. It is happening. It is exactly what they expected. They are not going in it. Junio was watching nothing in particular. His hands were flat. The room that existed now was one in which everyone present had just learned something, had learned it in real time, in their seats, with no preparation. And what they had learned was not that humans were dangerous. Every species with a fleet was dangerous in some configuration. That was not the lesson. The lesson was the 37 years. The lesson was the choice. Varel picked up his aide's communicator and started composing a note. Not for the official record, for the Council Intelligence Division. A revision request, the most significant revision request he had. Submitted in 58 years of service. Outside in the corridor, very quiet now because his aide had pulled all the non-essential staff, the station hummed. 71 hours was already running. The Dreth combine made the families of He1 whole in 68 hours. Not 69, not 70, not the full 71, 68. And if the speed of it said anything, it said that they had run their models again somewhere in the middle of the night following part 4 of the session and had received different answers than before, and had decided that 68 was a better number than 71 in the same way that a man in a burning building decides an open window is more interesting than it was an hour ago. Taiho received the confirmation at 0400 in the command room. He did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. 11 children were still 11 children. The number did not change because the outcome was the one the 71 hours had been designed to produce. He simply said, "Stand down first wave, begin fold back on my mark," and his aide echoed the order down the chain. And the enormous patient ships that had been sitting in their legal positions like enormous patient facts turned their engines on and began the long fold home. Taiho sat in a chair that had held him for 71 hours. He closed his eyes. The green header channel went dark. Varel did not sleep well and woke early and sat at his desk with the human diplomatic profile in front of him. It was 41 years old, compiled before humanity's first session, updated 3 times in the first decade, and then essentially left alone because nothing in the subsequent 30 years of observation had seemed to require significant revision, and he read it now with the careful attention of a man who suspects he has been reading a map of the wrong territory. The document described a species that was, in the assessment committee's language, conflict-averse in formal settings, strongly institutionally oriented, unusually invested in the success of multi-species governance structures, and likely to respond to aggressive pressure tactics with process-seeking behavior rather than escalation. He reached the last line of the summary. Asterisk when negotiating with human representatives, patience and procedural engagement are recommended, as the species responds poorly to aggressive pressure tactics asterisk. He read it again. Asterisk responds poorly asterisk. He sat with those 2 words for a long time. Asterisk responds poorly asterisk was, in retrospect, doing the kind of work that 2 words should not be asked to do alone. It was carrying 41 years of assumption, the full weight of every session he had ever watched, every note in his private log, every time the humans had absorbed something and smiled and kept their temperature level and chosen the room, and it had done this carrying without complaint because no one had ever thought to put it down and look at what was underneath it. The humans did not respond poorly to aggressive pressure tactics. The humans had a response to aggressive pressure tactics that the assessment committee had never considered because they had no frame for a species that could produce it. They responded by deciding the tactic had forfeited the room's relevance, and then they worked for 62 hours in complete legal silence doing the thing the room would have prevented them from doing, and then they came back to the room and reported it. Calmly, with a document, in the same voice they had been using for 37 years. He wrote the revision request. It was the longest document he had produced in his career, not because he had a lot to say, but because he had to be careful about how he said it, because the Council Intelligence Division would need to understand not just what had happened but what it meant about every interaction they had ever logged, and when he finished it he read it once and sent it before he could find reasons not to. The session that followed the He1 resolution was, on its surface, entirely ordinary. Standard agenda, trade indices, a border arbitration, pending infrastructure motions, and the chamber was its usual composition except that the Dreth delegation had sent a reduced complement, no advocates, no document cases, 2 delegates who sat at their arc and contributed nothing to any item on the agenda and left without speaking to anyone at all. The humans arrived through the left entrance. Junio, Nara, the usual junior staff. Junio sat down, both hands flat on the table. The smile was back. It was exactly where it had always been, the same operational altitude, the same category that existed outside happy and unhappy, the same door painted to look like a wall that Varel had been cataloguing for 37 years, and if it had ever been gone from Junio's face it left no evidence of having been absent. Several other councillors visibly relaxed when they saw it. Varel did not relax. He had spent 1 sleepless night and 1 long morning with a 41-year-old document and he was no longer capable of seeing the smile as a fixed thing. He saw it now the way you see a tool mounted on a wall after you have watched the tool come down and do its work. It was back in its place, it was clean and orderly, and now you knew what it was for. The session proceeded. When it ended, Varel moved through the corridor toward the exit and saw that Junio had paused near the left entrance, not leaving yet, speaking quietly with one of his junior staff, and Varel adjusted his route without examining why. He stopped a few steps from Junio. "You were always capable of that," Varel said. It was not a question. He had decided questions were the wrong instrument for this conversation. It was a statement that required calibration, and he offered it to see how Junio would calibrate it. Junio looked at him with the patient attention he applied to everything. "We've always been capable of most things," he said. "Not proud, not modest. The voice of a man reciting a fact he has known for a long time and does not find especially interesting anymore. The council is worth more than most things." A small pause, a small open-handed gesture that Varel would spend a lot of time thinking about afterward. "So we don't, most days." "And the days you do?" Varel asked. Junio looked at him for a moment, the full weight of however many years it took to produce a face that's still that readable and that illegible simultaneously, and then he said, "You saw it." A pause. "Now you know what it looks like." A pause. "That's probably useful to you." He walked away. Nara 2 steps behind. The junior staff closing the formation after. Varel stood in the corridor and watched them go and did not move for a long time after the left entrance had swallowed all 4 of them. He thought about the phrase, *civil mode*, the joke that had been running through the council for 3 decades, the shorthand that 17 species had been using because it was efficient and a little funny and implied something about the humans that everyone found comfortable to imply. *civil mode* implied a setting. Settings implied other settings. Varel had spent 37 years sitting next to the implication and never following it to the end of its logic, because the end of that logic was uncomfortable and the council was a room designed to avoid uncomfortable ends of logic, and the humans had been cooperative about this for 37 years, and there had been no reason to push. Now there had been a reason. And the reason had lasted 68 hours and involved no raised voices. And no formal war declaration and no action outside the legal parameters of a charter the humans had co-authored and had never once violated. And then it had ended and the smile had come back and the hands had gone flat on the table and the room had resumed. The room had resumed. That was the thing Varel kept landing on, not the 68 hours, not the fleets, not the operational summary read aloud in a level voice. The room had resumed, which meant the humans had put civil mode back on the way you put a coat back on when you come inside, and they would wear it to the next session and the session after that, and the smile would be at its operational altitude and the voice would be at river temperature, and every other species in this chamber would go back to treating it as a nature rather than a choice. Varel was not going to do that again. He pulled out his communicator and added 1 line to the revision request he had already sent, a postscript, informal, addressed personally to the division head. The phrase civil mode should be removed from all internal communications materials. It implies the humans have a default, and we have now seen sufficient evidence that what they have is a preference, which is a different thing entirely. He pocketed it. He walked back to his office. Somewhere in the deep corridor of UEF Strategic Command, Taiho sat in a chair that had held him for 71 hours and finally, fully closed his eyes, and the enormous ships that had folded back to their home positions sat in their berths quiet and clean and ready, the way tools are ready, the way all tools are always ready, hanging patient on their wall, waiting to see if tomorrow will be a day that requires them or a day that doesn't. It would probably be a day that didn't. It was usually a day that didn't. The humans were very good at choosing the room. They had just gotten better at making sure everyone in the room understood what that choice actually cost.